Hello, this is Will Faerber from Art to Ride, and today we're looking at a first submission by Nicole of her horse Quinn. Nicole, my wife Karen is going to send you an email to talk more about the saddle fit that we're looking at here. And there's not enough time here for me really to get into all of that. So she will send you an email and talk to you about that. Nicole is trying to find a saddle to fit her horse, and of course that can be a very frustrating situation if you're living someplace whether you don't have access to good saddle fitters. And in fact, that's how we became more involved in this. And my wife ended up learning how to do this process because we were so frustrated ourselves here in Southern California trying to find somebody who could fit our saddles. So happily now, I think my wife is one of the better fitters that I've ever seen. And so we're very fortunate to always have fitting saddles these days. So I understand what you're going through out there. It can be very, very difficult. And of course, you get a lot of different information from a lot of different people. But as I said, my wife will help you as best she can. She's going to email you directly and talk about the saddle fit. Now, the one thing that I did see in that little clip of the horse was his bridle. You're using a fixed or full cheek snaffle with the fixed parts on the side that hold the bit in place in the horse's mouth. It actually keeps the bit from rotating. So remember, when you have a fixed bit like that, it's a little more severe in the horse's mouth. If you need that, great. If you don't, I think most horses go better in a loose ring snaffle. Now, the other thing that I noticed was your noseband seemed way too low. I would never put a noseband that low on the horse. It's almost down, almost to the nostrils. And that's really not good because that's very soft cartilage there on the end of the nose, and we really don't want to have a lot of pressure on it or any pressure on it. Of course, we shouldn't have pressure on the horse's face anywhere, in the sense that we never want to over tighten those nosebands. So at least be sure that that noseband is very loose, at least that you can get 2 fingers underneath it. And if it were I would try to raise it up a little bit so that the noseband part of it over the top of the horse's nose is not so low down on the soft cartilage. So you might want to think about that. I basically use only one kind of bit on all my horses, and that's a French link loose ring snaffle. It seems to give the horse the most freedom. So if you have a horse that needs a little more control, like the Bochet bits that fix the bit, the snaffle bit, they're just a little more severe when you do that. But getting back to the horse here now, I'm liking what I'm seeing here in the walk. This is starting to swing quite nicely. Nicole bought this horse about 2 years ago, so she must have purchased him when he was 14, 16 now. And she's had a few soundness issues that it sounded like most of them were caused by ill-fitting saddles. And once again, how important that is. You can certainly ruin a horse for life if they get sore around the withers and really start to get these deep in pain areas in their shoulders from where the saddle can come back. The shoulders can actually run into the saddle and create problems there. But this is actually looking pretty good here, and I'm loving the way you're walking this horse. The stretch is going pretty good. And as we go into a trot, now we'd like the trot to be more swinging than this ultimately, but for beginning, this is pretty good. The horse is accepting contact with that sham bone, not overreacting to it in any way. So we just need to, what I'd like to see at this point is just to send the horse on just a little bit more and see if we can get a little more swing without losing that position. But of course, the stretch is more important than anything else. So, if you find that when you push the horse, the head just kind of comes up and the horse races forward, then we don't want to do that either. But this is actually starting to look a little better here. It's starting to swing a little more actively. And of course, I never expect horses just come right out and be perfect as soon as we start them. But this is quite nice, and you're doing a good job with the lunging. You're staying at the top of your triangle formed by the rein in your hand and the whip in your left hand. And the horse is moving pretty accurately and pretty rhythmically around the circle. So for the short time you've been doing this, I would say this is starting to look pretty good. Now in these photographs, I don't see any problem with the horse's soundness-wise. She's just gotten over some kind of little soundness issue. But this is looking quite good. I'd like to see the horse stretch a little deeper and stay there consistently. And I'd like to see a little bigger swing, but this is really quite good for starting out. Remember, we never want to agitate the horse, and we don't want to run the horse forward. So I'd rather you take more time as you're doing and give the horse time to just get into it, and try to get a little more at a time rather than just racing the horse forward, as I said. But this trot is looking pretty good. Just remember at times it looks like the shoulder kind of goes a little bit. So remember when you're lunging to keep trying to send the hindquarters out away from you a little bit more. So we get both ends of the horse on the same circle. This one is not doing that too badly. That is pulling the shoulders to the outside, but just a little bit as I see in places. Basically, I'd say this is all going pretty well. Once again, we would like the stretch to be a little more consistent, but as long as it gets there in the end, that's what we're looking for. I don't expect, once again, any horse to come out and just immediately go. Now, you'll see some of the horses that I have after they've been with me for a while, they pretty much just come out, and I don't use any shambones or side reins or anything, and they stretch right and get right into that. It feels good to them, but of course, that takes a while to get to that point. But once again, the beauty of the classical system is that we are asking a horse to move in the way that nature intended, so they don't put up so much resistance to it. And I like how you came back to the walk. That'd be about the right amount of time I'd like to spend to the trot. So we never want to just race the horse around. Once again, with lunging, it's so important that we don't use lunging just to wear horses out, as we see so many people doing these days, where they just, and it's usually grooms doing it for the riders. We see at the show all the time where horses just, because people can't get away with drugging so much anymore, so they just lunge them until they're half dead. If you're ever anywhere where all the big shows are, like on the Florida circuit, I mean, they start lunging the horses at 5 o'clock in the morning. And I've seen horses out there for 2 hours at a time and even longer getting ready for shows. But of course, when we lunge like that and all we lunge for is to tire the horse out, of course, the horse just gets fitter and fitter, but we're not adding anything to the level of the horse's control. So horses can sometimes, if you got on one of those horses and tried to ride it without the 2 hours lunging, you'd find yourself in big trouble. So once again here, this stretch looks pretty good. I would once again like to see it just swinging a little more actively, which I think you can get a little more out of this horse than is there. But this is certainly a good start in the right direction. So just as the horse gets more consistent in the stretch, just try to send it on just a little bit more. So we get a little more swing in the trot, a little bigger trot. In other words, we open it up. Now we don't want to work the horse in like extended gaits, but we want to work the horse in its best natural gait, so to speak, without asking it to extend. And that's a little different on each horse depending on how it's built. You know, a lot of these warm bloods today are bred so well for lengthening that and of course that is one of the things I look at as a horse that's able to lengthen its stride without changing the rhythm right from the beginning. And we see babies that can do that, and those are the ones that when I go out looking for dressage horses, that's one of the main things I look for, is that ability to lengthen the stride without speeding up naturally. But everything I'm seeing here is actually quite good, and is certainly going to lead to you getting somewhere with this horse. For the short amount of time you've been doing this, this is showing a lot of improvement. The walk here, while it's not as good as it could be, is not bad. Once again, we want that walk to be a little more swinging than that. But once again, just try to get a little bit at a time. Try to open it up a little bit at a time rather than getting the horse aggravated and getting it running around you. And once again, we see this walk is a little bit slow. You see sort of a little bit of a hesitancy as the horse lifts its back legs. Not terrible, believe me, we see much, much worse. But I just like to see a lot more swing in that walk as you can get it. You might want to work a little closer to the horse in the walk, that is shorten your rein so you're actually walking a little more with the horse. Then you can get within the strike zone, so to speak, of your whip, that you could actually touch the horse if you wanted to. And just kind of walk with the horse and get it swinging and active a little bit more. I think you'd be able to get a little more out of the horse if you did that. Now, once again, we want the circle to be about the size circle. That's why I'm saying you would want to shorten your rein and get closer to the horse. And that means you have to take bigger steps and actually walk with the horse a little bit. And see if you can encourage out a little more active walk in that way. But you're doing just the right thing, and you certainly want to intersperse periods of walk in your trot work. So we don't just trot, 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 trot when we're in the very beginning. So we don't, once again, we don't want to spend a lot of time doing the wrong thing. So if the horse is racing around with his head up in the air, we want to come back to the walk and just let it relax again. Once again, we don't want to develop a lot of aerobic fitness without a lot of control. Now that's something it's a little harder to do on the warm bloods, but with thoroughbred or hot-blooded horses, you'll find it happens very fast. They get fit very fast, and that's one of the biggest problems with people reschooling thoroughbreds. They just don't realize how fast they can get fit and want to go. So once again, that looks pretty good. Looking at this saddle fit here, once again, my wife's going to comment on that. I don't, it doesn't look, terrible or anything like that. Sitting here looking at it, it looks like it might be pretty good. But of course, it's hard for us to see without being there. So my wife is going to write to you, and she'll talk to you more about that and maybe give you some ideas about how to go about checking it yourself. Once again, I highly recommend that everybody watch our video or watch Karen's video on saddle fit on our website, and that'll really give you some insights into what you're looking for. Because once again, we have to learn these things ourselves, and that's why we put these things on here, so that you can make decisions yourself and not stuck, having to take the advice of a trainer who may or may not know what they're talking about. Once again, biggest thing to realize in the horse business is just because someone, or in anything, just because someone says something with a great deal of conviction doesn't mean it's necessarily true. And unfortunately, a lot of dressage trainers get very good at sounding very convincing to people and very authoritative, and and really don't encourage questioning of what they do, so to speak. But I would say to people all the time, gain as much knowledge yourself. If I do anything else with this website, then just give people the, an idea of what correct training ought to look like, so that they can go out and evaluate for themselves the people that they're thinking about training with. They'll be able to look at their horses and see the muscling on them, see them ride, and make decisions for themselves about whether or not this would be a good person to work with for your horse. So on the walk here, once again, just like the lunge line, it could be swinging a little more active, but it's really not bad. I mean, it's pretty rhythmic. I'd like to see the horse stretch a little more than it's doing here, but it's going to in a moment, I think. So this is all pretty good. And once again, I love how you're just keeping this horse to simple things here. Big wide turns, 20-meter circles, 30-meter circles, that kind of thing, whatever the width of the ring is that you're working in there. Remember, it just absolutely has no purpose at all to ask horses for things that they can't physically do. And once again, that's why we see so many people encountering problems, because they just don't realize, that the reason that they are fighting, or they're watching their trainer fight their horse, is that they're asking for something that the horse cannot physically do, so it resists. The beauty of the classical system is that we run into very little resistance, because we're developing the horse in such a way that we're improving it each and every day and getting better and better, but yet never trying to force the horse into something it cannot do. Once again, when collection is possible with a horse that you've developed correctly, you can get that collection very easily. It's not something that you have to whip the horse up to do. And once again, as I always say, if you're pulling on the mouth of the horse to try to create collection, that is, holding the horse hard in your hands and pulling the neck up, you never will create collection, because the horse will never develop in the right way that allow that to happen. So once again, here in the walk, we just like to see this get a little more active. Remember to use your legs alternately in the walk. That is, once again, as you feel the inward swing of the sides of the horse, very naturally as it walks along, your legs will swing in and out. The time to ask for the horse for a bigger walk is that moment as you feel the legs swing in, you just want to touch at that moment. That's the moment that the hind leg on that same side is about to come forward. And once again, by doing that, we teach the horse a different aid. In other words, if we want to trot, we use both legs together at the same time. If we want to walk, we use them alternately, and that way the horse understands, oh, I want something different. Whereas if you keep putting your legs, bumping with both legs at the same time for the walk, the horse is going to be thinking that you want to trot, and then when you go to trot, it's going to not know what you want. So once again, it's important that we have a clear and distinctly different aid for the different things that we do. In other words, we are establishing a dialogue. So, if we keep changing the words that we use, it can be very difficult for the horse, or the way we say them can be very difficult for the horse to understand, and also can create a lot of confusion between horse and rider. So once again, being very clear that, it's legs alone, hands alone. Now that doesn't mean that you throw away your hand when you use your legs. It means the hand is passive. You should never have, hardly any ever backwards, and certainly never any constant backwards tension against the mouth of the horse. Yes, we can soften the horse by closing our fingers a little bit, and we can soften the jaw and poll a little bit, But we never want to use the force of the reins to pull the head and neck back up and compress it against the body of the horse. Once again, when you go to dressage shows and you see these horses that flip out their front legs, in other words, the front legs extend way further than the back legs, that's the horses. Usually you'll see that the shoulder, the neck is being held against the top of the shoulder, and that's what actually makes the horse flip its legs out. But that kind of work does great damage to the body of the horse, and that's why we see horses getting tendon problems in the front legs, because once again, if the horse cannot extend to the same degree behind and you ask it to do that in front, every time you do it, you're putting a great deal of pressure on the horse's joints because they become overstressed. You know, and dressage is very much like yoga, which I experienced myself, in the sense that, you know, when it's done right, it's the best thing in the world for you. But, you know, you can, if you do it wrong, it can be the worst thing for you. I myself was going to hot yoga for a while, which I really enjoyed, but I ended up overflexing the tendons in my elbows and could barely lift my hands for about a month. So I realized the error of my ways. I was overdoing it. So people do that with horses all the time. Don't overdo it in your enthusiasm. So that walk was pretty good. I would have liked to have seen it got to a better stretch before you went to the trot work. For me, it just didn't really get all the way there in the walk as much as I would like it to happen. And so, of course, when we come to the trot, you know, it's kind of short, the horse's head up. You see how the hind legs are kind of falling out behind there. So what I'd like to see you do in the future is get this horse much more active in the walk and more swinging in the walk before you ever go to the trot. That's how I go about everything. I put everything in order. You know, if I can't get the horse over its back in the walk, I'm probably not going to trot it at all. Now, that's not to say there are exceptions to these rules. I mean, once in a while, there are horses that will stretch better in the trot than they will in the walk. There's horses that can get over their backs better in the canter, as you see me talking about very often. Not many. That's about 5% of the horses in the world. But we want to work the horse where we can work it in the most favorably, so to speak, where we can get it to stretch over its back. But you get the horse to come through, so that's pretty good. I mean, you went into the trot, and it was a little hollow there for a moment, but as you went on, you got it. So had you not gotten it by that time, I would have asked you to come back to the walk and reestablish that swing in the walk again before going on to the trot. But once again, we can see here that the trot has gone better once you got on it. You got the horse moving forward, that is swinging a little more actively, and the horse began to stretch into the contact, and that's exactly what we're looking for. So once again, what you're doing here is going to have a good effect upon the horse. So you didn't do, in other words, all of the part where he was a little hollow, you were working towards getting him around, which he came around within just a couple of moments there. So that was really, really good. And actually, the trot work here is actually a little better than the walk work was. I don't know if it's just that this horse maybe, and there are some horses like, you know, kind of lethargic-y kind of horses. This doesn't look like that, but, you know, sometimes those horses can be very hard to get to walk out. You know, and there's the cases where it's also good, remember, if you have access to somewhere to ride out and your horse doesn't get overexcited when you do that, it's sometimes good to get them out of the ring and get them on a trailer with another horse when we have horses that have become soured to ring work. Now remember, horses become sour to ring work because people, you know, get in the ring. They say, people say to me all the time, my horse hates dressage, it loves to ride out. Well, that tells me very much that every time the person tries to ride dressage, they're going in there and trying to pull the horse into a frame because they don't really understand how the horse is supposed to function over its back. So, of course, the horse gets very resistive, and the people say, oh, my horse doesn't like dressage. Well, there's not a horse in the world that doesn't like being ridden the way you're riding this one right now. They all do, and this is the only way that you can reclaim horses, you know, that have been badly trained and pulled in, you know, and lamed that way. So as I say to people all the time, you know, the critics of this type of work will tell you, oh, you're just riding your horse around in the forehand, because they're looking at the horse's neck, because the horse's neck is down and stretched. They're not looking at the back end of the horse. Once again, yes, the horse may still be on its forehand a bit when it's first learning how to stretch, but it will not be anywhere nearly on the forehand as much as a horse whose head has been pulled up and its back is hollow. Because the back is hollow, the horse is always, remember, on the forehand, no matter how high it lifts its legs. That's not what we're looking for in dressage, is how high the horse lifts its legs, especially not its knees. And once again, as a horse collects, it will, and as collection, what happens in real collection is the horse, you know, what we lose in forward motion, we gain in lift. So the gaits become round and forward and not just shortened. So once again, that trot work was really good. The horse got into a great stretch, and now coming back to the walk, I mean, it is kind of interesting with this one that it actually stretched better for you in the trot work than it did at the walk. But I would like you to work a lot more in the walk in the future and continue to try to get that longer and more active. And once again, I think the lunge line work will help you, as we talked about on that, of getting closer to the horse when you lunge, especially in the walk work, so that you can try to activate the horse a little more. So same thing here, you've gotten on, and once we started the trot again, it became a little on the short side. But I like how you're not trying to force the head down. Just continue to try to open it up from behind. It just needs a little bigger stride. So what I would tell you here is just ask the horse to move actively forward a little more. Now, it may be that this horse is a little harder in this direction than the other. So the thing I would say to you is, work the horse a little more on the side where the horse goes really good. Now this stretch is looking a lot better here. Now this is very good work here, what we're looking at. This is what we're talking about. And once again, once you get to this position, try to open the horse's stride just a little bit more than you're doing here to get it open. Remember, we're always looking for the longest step with the slowest rhythm. So sometimes we have to compromise a little bit, in terms of speed for what we want to get that to happen. So we won't want the horse to race on. So I'd rather that you go slow and do what you do correctly rather than to have the horse running around forward. But this is a good stretch that we're getting here, and it's certainly going to lead you to correcting this horse's problems. Because as we said, this is the only way you can correct the problems, and should be part of every horse's training. And it's not like we don't just build the car and then nothing has to be done. We still have to keep changing the oil and lubricating the joints and that sort of thing, just like a horse does. So they're not automatons. And even, as I said, even automatons like cars or motorcycles, it still requires maintenance. Well, the horse requires maintenance. If we ride the horse up all the time, it's bound to get hollow and flat in the back. So this is how we go back and correct that. So it doesn't matter what level, as I talk about, even a Grand Prix horse starts every day at the same level that is completely stretched. It just comes up into a higher frame later on after it's warmed up. It's just like we don't go to the gym and do the hardest thing we can do right off the bat. We have to warm up our joints and muscles so that we build up to the hardest thing we're going to do so that we don't injure ourselves. Well, the same thing is true of the horse. I watched a tape yesterday of someone online on one of these online training things, and the lady was telling people to sit as heavy as they can in the saddle. And this poor horse was so sway-backed to start with, but of course it was a $1 million looking horse that had a lot of leg movement, which made the woman think she was doing something. But the advice to sit heavy, she was saying that you should never try to lighten your seat in the saddle, and that is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. How do you think horses get sore in the back? They get sore in the back because someone puts too much weight on them and they never give them the break. If you never give your horse's back a break, it will drop eventually. Now, once again, if you have one of these $1 million horses that looks fabulous, even though it's going hollow to those who don't know what they're looking at, the result is the same at the end of the day, no matter how many ribbons you may win. And this particular person I'm talking about, it was saying this horse had only been in training for 3 years, and she was showing at Grand Prix, and while the horse, looked to the uninitiated like something might be going on there that was kind of active and pretty. But once again, if you know what you're looking at, you would see that the hips were very high. The horse was never collected, and all it was doing was lifting its legs up, while this woman was proudly telling us how all she did was sit to the trot, and she never rose to the trot on this horse. And what you're talking about here is just very normal in the beginning of horses having moments, with young horses. You never know what's going to set them off. That's why we have to come out every day. We want our training to be very systematic. Horses work best when they know what's coming, and we take them through the same steps each day and then build on that foundation. That's the idea. Like building a house, build a house without a foundation, it will fall apart no matter how beautiful the house is. And that's kind of what we see people doing in dressage. Yes, it looks beautiful for a couple of years, and then we find that the horse is lame, and when you see what people are paying for some of these horses, and either they're just so wealthy that they just don't give a damn, and all they care about is putting another trophy on their wall or something. But I don't think so. I think it's more, I've never met a person yet, who came into riding with the idea of, hey, I want to beat up on horses, but yet, sadly, that's what it deteriorates into, once again, after they watch their trainers. I mean, how many trainers I've heard sit and yell at people to kill that horse and this kinds of thing, which should never be part of any dialogue in a riding lesson. So getting back to the lunge work here a little bit. So again, this is pretty good. I'd like the stretch just to be a little more consistent, and just as you get to this point, ask for a little more out of the horse. Get a little more swing out of it. But once again, everything you're doing here is you're on the right track, so just know that. I mean, yes, are there little things you can improve here? Yes, and certainly you will, and the horse will too. And of course, the beauty of the classical system, by riding without hanging onto the horse's mouth, we actually learn how to ride and actually how to balance. If you've been taught to hold against the mouth of the horse, what you should do differently here is nothing at all, just what you did. As I was talking about, you never know, young horses, or when I say young, I mean undeveloped horses. Something may freak them out, it can come out of nowhere. You just go right back to what you're doing. What I would do here is just bring the horse into a smaller circle. So I never want to jerk on the reins unless it's a very last resort kind of thing where a horse is trying to literally bolt with me out of the arena on the lunge line or something. Then yes, I'd give a little stronger tug to the rein. But in most cases, we want to use a smaller circle to discipline them. Just bring them in very gradually, nothing abrupt, and ask them to trot again. So that's what you could do here until they just settle down. And I use the size of the circle as a reward. So as soon as the horse comes back to the trot, I immediately let them back out in the larger circle again. And the circle will do the job so that you don't have to fight the horse, because the horse will very soon get tired. I mean, I've seen a few that would do it for quite some time, but most of them don't want to canter around a little 10-meter circle. So if you bring them in, that's going to tire them out pretty quickly, and they're going to be ready to come back to a trot. So that's what you should have done there, is just reeled him in a little bit sooner. As soon as he did that, I would bring him right in rather than to let him keep cantering and cantering and cantering. Because once again, now that canter is pretty hollow there, unlike the trot that you had. So you've done everything. You just could have done this a little faster just by bringing him in a little closer to you sooner to get him back to that trot. And you're exactly right that you would like to see him relax in the trot before going back to the walk. Now, there would be an exception to that rule. If you find he doesn't relax, then you'd want to go ahead and come back to the walk and reestablish the walk. Because there are some horses, very hot horses that will race around you, especially ones that have been lunged for hours and hours, will race around you for hours and hours. So those are the ones we really want to come back to the walk again. Once again, because we can damage a horse a great deal. Remember, whenever a horse is hollow, you have no shock absorbers on the horse. So that means all that concussion of movement is going into the soft tissue, and we never want that to happen. So if it went on for very long, more than a minute or two, I would bring the horse back to the walk and just let it chill out in the walk again. But you got the horse back into the trot, and once again, it's starting to stretch again, and that's what's important. So remember, the most important thing is that we end on a good note every day. Almost always we come back to the walk and stretch. Now, the only time that I don't do that, for instance, is taking a horse up in the levels. And whenever the horse has suddenly just shown me something that has been difficult, as soon as I get something that's been difficult for the horse, I'm going to immediately stop and get off and reward the horse and be done. And I don't care if I've only been on the horse for 5 minutes. If I get something better than I've ever gotten it for, I'm going to quit. And that's the most important cardinal rule that you'll ever learn, is just when the horse does the best work it does, or especially when you make a breakthrough with something and the horse really gets it, just stop and get off. Once again, that's the biggest reward you can give a horse, is to get off its back. Once again, that's why they want to buck you off. They'd like to get you off. So once again, if we teach them, do the work correctly and quickly, and pretty soon you'll be done. And that's what we want them to learn. So this has all been very good. I haven't seen a thing here that I thought was terrible. Your lunging technique is pretty good. Once again, you could just get closer to the horse at times so that you can get a little more activity. But everything really seems to be on track here. So I'm very happy with what I've seen here today, and I think you should be too. You're definitely in the right direction. Once again, we just like to end. So for instance, like here, I'd like to get the horse all the way in that stretch again, if we can. And once again, if we couldn't, I'd just come back to the walk and let him stretch in the walk like you do just there, and that's just fine. What's important is that we end in the stretch. You're doing a really good job. Keep it up. I look forward to seeing your next submission. Just get a little closer to the horse at times in the walk. to help you there. And once again, just bringing the horse into a smaller circle toward you when he canters off. Everything else there looked really good and very much like it's headed in the right direction. This is Will Faerber from Art to Ride. Look forward to seeing your next submission. Keep up the good work.